Okay, I think that maybe it worked this time. I had to delete the other one because for some reason it was just not going to let me go live no matter what I did. Hopefully this one's working. Okay. As always, please forgive all the noise around the house and all that good stuff. We are still on the Dark Tower series, Book 4, Wizard and Glass, and we are ready to start part 2, which is called Susan. Now, given that title, it is obvious we are fixing to take a trip down memory lane and learn more about the gunslinger. However, that is going to take us out of this new little world that we find ourselves in. And so I want you to remember the clues that we have so far about where we are, maybe what other Stephen King world we may be in at the moment. And we will get more clues later on. Also, sorry that I haven't been doing my intro and my closing for book club, my outro. I still don't know how to do it on OBS, so that will come later. Okay. 1 second, and I'm gonna grab some water, and then we will begin. Oh, also, there's still Easter eggs in the picture nobody's spotted yet. Okay. Chapter 1 of Book 2 is called, or Part 2 is called Beneath the Kissing Moon. A perfect disk of silver, the Kissing Moon, as it was called in full earth, hung above the ragged hill 5 miles east of Hambry and 10 miles south of Eyebolt Canyon. Below the hill, late summer heat still held, suffocating even 2 hours after sundown, but atop the Coos, it was as if reap had already come. With its strong breezes and the frost-pinched air. For the woman who lived here with no company but a snake and one old muty cat, it was to be a long night. Never mind, though. Never mind, my dear. Busy hands are happy hands. So they are. She waited until the hoofbeats of her visitors' horses had faded, sitting quietly by the window in the hut's large room. There was only one other, a bedroom little bigger than a closet. Musty, the 6-legged cat, was on her shoulder. Her lap was full of moonlight. 3 horses, bearing away 3 men, the big coffin hunters, they called themselves. She snorted. Men were funny, aye, so they were, and the most amusing thing about them was how little they knew it. Men with their swaggering, belt-hitching names for themselves. Men so proud of their muscles, their drinking capacities, their eating capacities, so everlastingly proud of their pricks. Yes, even in these times, when a good many of them could shoot nothing but strange, bent seed that produced children fit only to be drowned in the nearest well. Ah, but it was never their fault, was it, dear? No, always it was the woman, her womb, her fault. Men were such cowards, such grinning cowards. These 3 had been no different from the general run. The old one was limp, might bear watching. Aye, so he might. A clever and overly curious pair of eyes had looked out from his head, but she saw nothing in them she could not deal with, came it to that. Men. She could not understand why so many women feared them. Hadn't the gods made them with the most vulnerable part of their guts hanging right out of their bodies like a misplaced bit of bull? Kick them there, and they curled up like snails. Caress them there, and their brains melted. Anyone who doubted that second bit of wisdom needed only look at her night's second bit of business, the one which still lay ahead. Thorin, Mayor of Hambry, Chief Guard of Barony, no fool like an old fool. Yet none of these thoughts had any real power over her or any real malice to them. At least, not now. The 3 men who called themselves the Big Coffin Hunters had brought her a marvel, and she would look at it. Fill up her eyes with it so she would. The gimp. Jonas had insisted she put it away. He had been told she had a place for such things. Not that he wanted to see it himself, not any of her secret places, gods forbid. At this Sally DeTrape and Reynolds had laughed like trolls, and so she had. But the hoofbeats of their horses had been swallowed by the wind now, and she would do as she liked. The girl whose tits had stolen what little there was of Hartthorne's mind would not be here for another hour at least. The old woman had insisted that the girl walk from town, citing the purification value of such a moonlit heel and toe, actually just wanting to put a safe bumper of time between her 2 appointments, and during that hour she would do as she liked. "Oh, it's beautiful, I'm sure it is," she whispered, and did she feel a certain heat in that place where the ancient bowlegs came together, a certain moisture in the dry creek which hid there. Gods. Aye, even though the box where they hid it, I felt its glam. So beautiful, Musty, like you. She took the cat from her shoulder and held it in front of her eyes. The old Tom purred and stretched out its pug of a face towards hers. She kissed its nose. The cat closed its milky gray-green eyes in ecstasy. "So beautiful like you. So you are, he?" She put the cat down. I walked slowly toward the hearth, where a late fire blazed, desolatarily eating at a single log. Musty's tail split at the tip, so it looked like the forked tail of a devil in an old drawing, switched back and forth in the room's dim orange air. Its extra legs, dangling from its sides, twitched dreamily. The shadow which trailed across the floor, grew up the wall, was a horror, a thing that looked like a cross between a cat and a spider. The old woman rose and went into her sleeping closet, where she had taken the thing Jonas had given her. "Lose that and you'll lose your head," he'd said. "Never fear me, my good friend," she'd replied, directing a cringing, servile smile back over her shoulder, all while thinking, men, foolish, strutting creatures they were. Now she went to the foot of the bed, knelt, and passed one hand over the earth floor there. Lines appeared in the sour dirt as she did. They formed a square. She pushed her finger into one of these lines, and it gave before her touch. She lifted the hidden panel, hidden in such a way that no one without the touch would ever be able to uncover it, revealing a compartment perhaps a foot square and 2 feet deep. Within it was an ironwood box. Curled atop the box was a slim green snake. When she touched its back, its head came up, its mouth yawned in a silent hiss, displaying 4 pairs of fangs, 2 on top and 2 on the bottom. She took the snake up, crooning to it. As she brought its flat face close to her own, its mouth yawned wider and its hissing became audible. She opened her own mouth. From between her wrinkled gray lips, she poked the yellowish, bad-smelling mat of her tongue, 2 drops of poison, enough to kill an entire dinner party. It mixed in the punch, fell on it. She swallowed, feeling her mouth and throat and chest burn as if with strong liquor. For a moment the room swam out of focus, and she could hear voices murmuring in the stenchy air of the hut, the voices of those she called the unseen friends. Her eyes ran sticky with water down the trenches time had drawn in her cheeks. Then she blew out a breath, and the room steadied, and the voices faded. She kissed her Mott between his lidless eyes. Time of the kissing moon, all right, she thought, and then set him aside. The snake slipped beneath her bed, curled itself in a circle, and watched as she passed her palms over the top of the ironwood. She could feel the muscles in her upper arms quivering, and that heat in her loins was more pronounced. Years it had been since she had felt the call of her sex, but she felt it now, so she did, and it was not the doing of the kissing moon. Or not much. The box was locked, and Jonas had given her no key, but that was nothing to her, who had lived long and studied much and trafficked with creatures that most men, for all their bold talk and struttering ways, would run from, as if on fire, had they caught even the smallest glimpse of them. She stretched one hand toward the lock, on which was inlaid the shape of an eye and the motto in high speech, "I see who opens me," and then withdrew it. All at once she could smell what her nose no longer noticed under ordinary circumstances, must and dust and a dirty mattress and the crumbs of food that had been consumed in bed. the mingled stench of ashes and ancient incense, the odor of an old woman with wet eyes and, ordinarily at least, a dry pussy. She would not open this box and look at the wonder it contained in here. She would go outside, where the air was clean and the only smells were sage and mesquite. She would look at it by the light of the kissing moon. Rhea of Coes Hill pulled the box from its hole with a grunt, rose to her feet with another grunt, this one from her nether regions, tucked the box under her arm, and left the room. The hut was far enough below the brow of the hill to block off the bitterest gusts of the winter wind, which blew almost constantly in these highlands from reaping until the end of wide earth. A path led to the hill's highest vantage beneath the full moon. It was a ditch of silver. The old woman toiled up it, puffing, her white hair standing out around her head in dirty clumps, her old dugs swaying from side to side under her black dress. The cat followed in her shadow, still giving off its rusty purr like a stink. At the top of the hill, the wind lifted her hair away from her ravaged face and brought her the moaning whisper of the thinny, which had eaten its way into the far end of Eyebolt Canyon. It was a sound few cared for, she knew, but she herself loved it. To Rhea of the Coast, it sounded like a lullaby. Overhead rode the moon, the shadows in its bright skin stretching the faces of lovers kissing. If you believed the ordinary fools below, that was. The ordinary fools below saw a different face or a set of faces in each full moon, but the hag knew there was only one. The face of the demon. The face of death. She herself, however, had never felt more alive. "Oh, my beauty," she whispered, and touched the lock with her gnarled fingers. A faint glimmer of red light showed between her bunched knuckles, and there was a click. Breathing hard, like a woman who has run a race, she put the box down and opened it. Rose-colored light, dimmer than that thrown by the kissing moon, but infinitely more beautiful, spilled out. It touched the ruined face hanging above the box, and for a moment made it the face of a young girl again. Musty sniffed, head stretched forward, ears laid back, old eyes rimmed with that rose light. Rhea was instantly jealous. "Get away, foolish. 'Tis not for the likes of you." She swatted the cat. Musty shied back, hissing like a kettle, and stalked in the dungeon to the hammock, which marked the very tip of Coes Hill. There he sat, affecting disdain and licking one paw as the wind combed ceaselessly through his fur. Within the box, peeping out of a velvet drawstring bag, was a glass globe. It was filled with a rosy light. It flowed in gentle pulses like the beat of a satisfied heart. "Oh, my lovely one," she murmured, lifting it out. She held it up before her, let its pulsing radiance run down the wrinkled face like rain. "Oh, you live, so you do." Suddenly the color within the globe darkened toward scarlet. She felt it thrum in her hands like an immensely powerful motor, and again she felt that amazing wetness between her legs, that tidal tug she believed had been left behind long ago. Then the thrumming died, and the light in the globe seemed to furl up like petals. Where it had been, there was now a pinkish gloom, and 3 riders coming out of it. At first she thought it was the men who had brought her the globe, Jonas and the others, but no, these were younger. Even younger than Dupape, who was about 25. The one on the left of the trio appeared to have a bird's skull mounted on the pommel of his saddle. Strange, but true. Then that one and the one on the right were gone, darkened away somehow by the power of the glass, leaving only the one in the middle. She took in the jeans and the boots he wore, the flat-brimmed hat that hid the upper half of his face, the easy way he sat on his horse, and her first alarmed thought was, gunslinger, come east from the inner baronies, aye, perhaps from Gilead itself, but she did not have to see the upper half of the rider's face to know he was little more than a child, and there were no guns on his hips. Yet she didn't think that youth came unarmed. If only she could see a little better. She brought the glass almost to the tip of her nose and whispered, "Closer, lovey, closer still." She didn't know what to expect. Nothing at all seemed most likely, but within the dark circle of the glass, the figure did come closer. Swam closer, almost, like a horse and rider under water, and she saw there was a quiver of arrows on his back. Before him, on the pommel of his saddle, was not a skull, but a short bow. And to the right side of the saddle, where a gunslinger might have carried a rifle in a scabbard, there was the feather-fluffed shaft of a lance. He was not of the old people. His face had none of that look, yet she did not think he was of the outer ark either. "But who are ye, cully?" she breathed, "and how shall I know ye? You've got your hat pulled down so far I can't see your God-poundin' eyes, so you do. But your horse, mayhap, or perhaps by your— Get away, Musty! Why do you trouble me so? Ugh!" The cat had come back from its lookout point and was twining back and forth between her swollen old ankles, wowing up at her in a voice even more rusty than its purr. When the old woman kicked out at him, Musty dodged agilely away, then immediately came back and started in again, looking up at her with moonstruck eyes and making those soft yowls. Rhea kicked out at it again, this once just as ineffectual as the first one, then looked into the glass once more. The horse and its interesting young rider were gone. The rose light was gone as well. It was now just a dead glass ball she held, its only light a reflection borrowed from the moon. The wind gusted, pressing her dress against the ruination that was her body. Musty, undaunted by the feeble kicks of his mistress, darted forward and began to twine about her ankles again, crying up at her the whole time. "There, do you see what you've done? You nasty bag of fleas and disease. The light's gone out of it. Gone out just when I—" Then she heard a sound from the cart track which led up to her hut and understood why Musty had been acting out. It was singing she heard. It was the girl she heard. The girl was Early. Grimacing horribly, she loathed being caught by surprise, and the little miss down there would pay for doing it. She bent and put the glass back in its box. The inside was lined with padded silk, and the ball fit as neatly as a breakfast egg in his lordship's cup. And still, from down the hill, the cursed wind was wrong, or she would have heard it sooner. The sound of the girl singing, now closer than ever. Love, oh careless love, can't you see what careless love has done?" "I'll give ye careless love, you virgin bitch," the old woman said. She could smell the sour reek of sweat from under her arms, but that other moisture had dried up again. "I'll give ye a payday for walking in early on old Rhea, so I will." She passed her fingers over the lock on the front of the box, but it wouldn't fasten. She supposed she had been over-eager to have it open, and she'd broken something inside when she used the touch. The eye in the motto seemed to mock her. "I see who opens me." It could be put right, and in a jiffy, but right now even a jiffy was more than she had. "Pestering cunt," she whined, lifting her head briefly toward the approaching voice. Almost here now, by the gods, and 45 minutes before her time. Then she closed the lid of the box. It gave her a pang to do it, because the glass was coming to life again, filling with the rosy glow, but there was no time for looking or dreaming now. Later, perhaps, after the object of Thorin's unseemingly late-life prickishness had gone. "And you must restrain yourself from doing anything too awful to the girl," she cautioned herself. "Remember, she's here because of him, and at least ain't one of those green girls with a bun in the oven and a boyfriend actin' reluctant about the cries of marriage. It's Thorin's doin'. This one's what he thinks about after his ugly old crow of a wife is asleep, if he takes himself in his hands and commences the evening milking. It's Thorin's doin'. He had the old law on his side, and he has power. Furthermore, what's in that box is his man's business, and if Jonas found out ye looked at it, that ye used it— Aye, but no fear of that. And in the meantime, possession were 9/10 of the law, were it not?" She hoisted the box under one arm, hoisted her skirts with her feet in hand, and ran back along the path to the hut. She could still run when she had to, though there were few who'd believe it. Musty ran at her heels, bounding along with his cloven tail held high and his extra legs flopping up and down in the moonlight. Chapter 2. Proving Honesty. Rhea darted into her hut, crossed in front of the guttering fire, then stood in the doorway to her tiny bedroom, swiping a hand through her hair in a distracted gesture. The bitch hadn't seen her outside the hut. She surely would have stopped caterwauling, or at least faltered in it if she had, and that was good. But the cursed hidey hole she'd sealed itself up again, and that was bad. There was no time to open it again either. Rhea hurried to the bed, knelt, and pushed the box far back into the shadows beneath. Aye, that would do, until Susie Greengown was gone. It would do very well. Smiling on the right side of her mouth, Rhea got up, brushed the dress down, and went to meet her second appointment of the night. Behind her, the unlocked lid of the box clicked open. It came up less than an inch, but that was enough to allow a sliver of pulsing rose-colored light to shine out. Susan Delgado stopped about 40 yards from the witch's hut, the sweat chilling on her arms and the nape of her neck. Had she just spied an old woman? Surely the one she had come to see, dart down the last bit of path leading from the top of the hill? She thought she had. Don't stop singing. When an old lady hurries like that, she doesn't want to be seen. If you stop singing, she'll likely know she was. For a moment, Susan thought she'd stop anyway, that her memory would close up like a startled hand and deny her another verse of the song which she had been singing since youngest childhood, but the next verse came to her, and she continued on, with feet as well as voice. Once my cares were far away. Yes, once my cares were far away. Now my love has gone from me, and misery is in my heart to stay. A bad song for a night such as this, mayhap, but her heart went its own way without much interest in what her head thought or wanted, always had. She was frightened to be out by the moonlight, when werewolves were said to walk. She was frightened of her errand, and she was frightened by the errand portended. Yet when she had gained the great road out of Hambry, and her heart had demanded she had run. Under the light of the kissing moon, and with her skirt held above her knees, she had galloped like a pony, with her shadow galloping right beside her. For a mile or more she had run, until every muscle in her body tingled, and the air she pulled down her throat tasted like some sweet heated liquid. And when she reached the upland track leading to the high sinister, she had sung, because her heart demanded it, and she supposed it really hadn't been such a bad idea. If nothing else, it had kept the worst of her McGrims away. Singing was good for that much, anyway. Now she walked to the end of the path, singing the chorus of Careless Love as she stepped into the scant light which fell through the open door and onto the stoop. A harsh rain-crow voice spoke from the shadows. "Stop your howlin', missy. It catches in my brain like a fish hook." Susan, who had been told all her life that she had a fair singing voice, a gift from her grandma no doubt, fell silent at once, abashed. She stood on the stoop with her hands clasped in front of her apron. Beneath the apron she wore her second-best dress. She only had two. Beneath it, her heart was thumping, very hard. A cat, a hideous thing with 2 extra legs sticking out of its sides like toasting forks, came into the doorway first. It looked up at her, seemed to measure her, then screwed its face up in a look that was eerily human. Contempt. It hissed at her, then flashed away into the night. Well, good evening to you, too, Susan thought. The old woman she had been sent to see stepped into the doorway. She looked Susan up and down with that same expression of flat-eyed contempt, then stood back. "Come in, and mind ye clap the door tight. The wind has a way of blowing it open, as ye see." Susan stepped inside. She didn't want to close herself into this bad-smelling room with the old woman, but when there was no choice, hesitation was ever a fault. So her father had said, whether the matter under discussion was sums and subtractions or how to deal with boys at barn dances when their hands became overly adventurous. She pulled the door firmly to and heard it latch. "And here ye are," the old woman said, and offered a grotesque smile of welcome. It was a smile guaranteed to make even a brave girl think of stories told in the nursery, winter's tales of old women with snaggled teeth and babbling cauldrons full of toad-green liquid. There was no cauldron over the fire in this room, nor was the fire itself much of a shake in Susan's opinion. But the girl guessed there had been betimes and things in it of which it might be better not to think. That this woman was a real witch and not just an old lady posing as one was something Susan had felt sure of from the first moment she had seen Rhea darting back inside her hut, with the malformed cat at her heels. It was something you could almost smell, like the reeky aroma rising off the hag's skin. "Yes," she said, smiling. She tried to make it a good one, bright and unafraid. "Here I am." "And it's early you are, my my little sweeting." "Early you are, he?" "I ran part way. The moon got into my blood, I suppose. That's what my dad would have said." The old woman's horrible smile widened into something that made Susan think of the way eels sometimes seem to grin, after death and just before the pot. "Aye, but dead he is. Dead these 5 years. Pat Delgado of the red hair and beard. The life mashed out of him by his own horse. Aye, and went into the clearing at the end of the path with the music of his own snapping bones in his ears. So he did." The nervous smile slipped from Susan's face as if slapped away. She felt tears, always close at the mere mention of her dad's name, burn at the back of her eyes. But she would not let them fall. Not in this heartless old crow's sight, she wouldn't. "Let our business be quick and done," she said in a dry voice that was far from her usual one. That voice was usually cheery and merry and ready for fun, but she was Pat Delgado's child, daughter of the best drover ever to work the Western Drop, and she remembered his face very well. She could rise to a stronger nature if required, as it now clearly was. The old woman had meant to reach out and scratch as deep as she could, and the more she saw that her efforts were succeeding, the more she would redouble them. The hag, meanwhile, was watching Susan shrewdly, her bunch-knuckled hands planted on her hips while her cat twined around her ankles. Her eyes were rheumy, but Susan saw enough of them to realize they were the same gray-green shade as the cat's eyes, and to wonder what sort of fell magic that might be. She felt an urge, a strong one, to drop her eyes, and would not. It was all right to feel fear, but sometimes a very bad idea to show it. "You look at me pert, missy," Reyes said at last. Her smile was dissolving slowly into a petulant frown. "Nay, old mother," Susan replied evenly. "Only as one who wishes to do the business she came for and be gone. I have come here at the wish of my Lord Mayor of Mejis, and at that of my Aunt Cordelia, sister of my father, my dear father, of whom I would hear no ill spoken." "I speak as I do," the old woman said. The words were dismissive, yet there was a trace of fawning servility in the old hag's voice. Susan set no importance on that. It was a tone such a thing as this had probably adopted her whole life, and came as automatically as breath. "I've lived alone a long time with no mistress but myself, and once it begins, my tongue goes where it will. Then sometimes it might be best not to let it begin at all." The old woman's eyes flashed ugly. "Curb your own, stripling girl, lest you find it dead in your mouth where it will rot, and make the mayor think twice about kissing you when he smells its stink, aye, even under such a moon as this." Susan's heart filled with misery and bewilderment. She'd come up here intent on only one thing: getting the business done as quickly as possible. A barely explained right that was apt to be painful and sure to be shameful. Now this old woman was looking at her with flat, naked hatred. How could things have gone wrong with such suddenness? Or was it always this way with witches? "We've begun badly, mistress. Can we start over?" Susan asked suddenly, and held out her hand. The hag looked startled. Although she did reach out and make a brief contact, the wrinkled tips of her fingers touching the short-nailed fingers of the 16-year-old girl who stood before her, with her clear-skinned face shining and her long hair braided down her back. Susan had to make a real effort not to grimace at the touch, brief as it was. The old woman's fingers were as chilly as those of a corpse, but Susan had touched chilly fingers before. "Cold hands, warm heart," Aunt Cord sometimes said. The real unpleasantness was in the texture, the feel of cold flesh, spongy and loose on the bones, as if the woman to whom they were attached had drowned and lain long in some pool. "Nay, nay, there was no starting over," the old woman said. "Yet mayhap we'll get on better than we've begun. You've a powerful friend in the mayor, and I'd not have him for my enemy." She's honest, at least, Susan thought, then had to laugh at herself. This woman would be honest only when she absolutely had to be. Left to her own devices and desires, she'd lie about everything, the weather, the crops, the flights of birds come reaping. "Ye came before I expected ye, and it's put me out of temper, so it has. Have you brought me something, missy? You have, I'll warrant." Her eyes were glittering once more, this time not with anger. Susan reached beneath her apron. So stupid wearing an apron for an errand on the backside of nowhere, but it was what custom demanded, and into her pocket. There, tied to a string so it could not be easily lost by young girls suddenly moved to run in the moonlight, perchance, was a cloth bag. Susan broke the binding string and brought the bag out. She put it in the outstretched hand before her, the palm so worn that the lines marking it were now little more than ghosts. She was careful not to touch Rhea again, although the old woman would be touching her again, and soon. "Is it the sound of the wind makes ye shiver?" Rhea asked, although Susan could tell her mind was mostly fixed on the little bag. Her fingers were busy tugging out at the knot of the drawstring. "Yes, the wind." "And so it should. 'Tis the voices of the dead ye hear in the wind, and when they scream so, 'tis because they regret. Aye." The knot gave. She loosened the drawstring and tumbled 2 gold coins into her hand. They were unevenly milled and crude. No one had made such for generations, but they were heavy, and the eagles engraved upon them had a certain power. Rhea lifted one to her mouth, pulled back her lips to reveal a few gruesome teeth, and bit down. The hag looked at the faint indentions her teeth had left in the gold. For several seconds she gazed, rapt, then closed her fingers over them tightly. While Rhea's attention was distracted by the coins, Susan happened to look through the open door to her left, and into what she assumed was the witch's bedchamber. And here she saw an odd and disquieting thing, a light under her bed. A pink, pulsing light. It seemed to be coming from some kind of box, although she could not quite. The witch looked up, and Susan hastily moved her eyes to a corner of the room where a net containing 3 or 4 strange white fruits hung from a hook. Then as the old woman moved and her huge shadow danced ponderously away from the part of the wall, Susan saw they were not fruits at all, but skulls. She felt a sickish drop in her stomach. "The fire needs building up, missy. Go round to the side of the house and bring back an armload of wood. Good-sized sticks are what's wanted, and never mind whining, you can't lug 'em. You're of a strapping good size, so you are." Susan had quit whining about chores around the time she had quit pissing into her clouts, said nothing, although it did cross her mind to ask Rhea if everyone who brought her gold was invited to lug her wood. In truth, she didn't mind. The air outside would taste like wine after the stench of the hut. She had almost reached the door when her foot struck something hot and yielding. The cat yowled. Susan stumbled and almost fell. From behind the door, the old woman issued a series of gasping, choking sounds, which Susan eventually recognized as laughter. "Watch Musty, my little sweet one. Tricksy he is, and tripsy as well. Betimes so he is, he—" And off she went in another gale. The cat looked up at Susan, its ears laid back, its gray-green eyes wide. It hissed at her, and Susan, unaware she was going to do it until it was done, hissed back. Like its expression of contempt, Musty's look of surprise was eerily, and in this case comically, human. It turned and fled for Rhea's bedroom, its split tail lashing. Susan opened the door and went outside to get the wood. Already she felt as if she had been here 1,000 years, and that it might be 1,000 more before she could go home. The air was as sweet as she had hoped, perhaps even sweeter, and for a moment she only stood on the stoop, breathing it in, trying to cleanse her lungs and her mind. After 5 good breaths, she got herself in motion. Around the side of the house she went, but it was the wrong side, it seemed, for there was no woodpile here. There was a narrow excuse for a window, however, half buried in some trough, an unlovely creeper. It was toward the back of the hut, and must look in the old woman's sleeping closet. "Don't look in there. Whatever she's got under her bed isn't your business, and if she were to catch you—" She went to the window despite these admonitions and peeked in. It was unlikely that Rhea could have seen Susan's face through the dense overgrowth of pig ivy, even if the old Besom had been looking in that direction, and she wasn't. She was on her knees, the drawstring bag caught in her teeth, reaching under the bed. She brought out a box and opened its lid, which was already ajar. Her face was flooded with soft pink radiance, and Susan gasped. For one moment it was the face of a young girl, but one filled with cruelty as well as youth. The face of a self-willed child determined to learn all the wrong things for all the wrong reasons. The face of the girl this hag once had been, mayhap. The light appeared to be coming from some sort of glass ball. The old woman looked at it for several moments, her eyes wide and fascinated. Her lips moved as if she were speaking to it, or perhaps even singing to it. The little bag Susan had brought from town, its strings still clamped in the hag's mouth, bobbed up and down as she spoke. Then, with what appeared to be great effort of will, she closed the box, cutting off the rosy light. Susan found herself relieved. There was something about it she didn't like. The old woman cupped one hand over the silver lock in the middle of the lid, and a brief scarlet light sprinkled out from between her fingers. All this with the drawstring bag still hanging from her mouth. Then she put the box on the bed, knelt, and began running her hands over the dirt just beneath the bed's edge. Although she touched only with her palms, lines appeared as if she had used a drawing tool. These lines darkened, becoming what looked like grooves. "The wood, Susan. Get the wood before she wakes up to how long you've been gone, for your father's sake." Susan pulled the skirt of her dress all the way up to her waist. She did not want the old woman to see dirt or leaves on her clothing when she came back inside, did not want to answer the questions of sight of such smut might provoke, and crawled beneath the window with her white cotton drawers flashing in the moonlight. Once she passed, she got to her feet again and hurried quietly around to the far side of the hut. Here she found the wood pile under an old, moldy-smelling hide. She took half a dozen good-sized chunks and walked back to the front door of the house with them in her arms. She entered, turning sideways to get her load through the doorway without dropping any. The old woman was back in the main room, staring moodily into the fireplace, where there was now little more than embers. Of the drawstring bag there was no sign. "Took you long enough, missy," Rhea said. She continued to look in the fireplace as if Susan were of no account, but one foot tapped below the dirty hem of her dress, and her eyebrows were drawn together. Susan crossed the room, peering over the load of wood in her arms as well as she could while she walked. It wouldn't surprise her a bit, despite the cat lurking near, hoping to trip her up. "I saw a spider," she said. "I flapped my apron at it to make it run away. I hate the look of them, so I do." "You'll see something ye like the look of even less soon enough," Rhea said, grinning her peculiar one-sided grin. "Out of old Thorne's nightshirt it'll come, stiff as a stick and red as a rhubarb. Here, hold a minute, girl. Ye gods, you've brought enough for a fair day bonfire." Rhea took 2 fat logs from Susan's pile and tossed them indifferently onto the coals. Embers spiled up from the dark, faintly roaring shaft of the chimney. "There, ye scattered what's left of your fire, you silly old thing, and will likely have to rekindle the whole mess," Susan thought. Then Rhea reached into the fireplace with one splayed hand, spoke a guttural word, and the logs blazed up as if soaked in oil. "Put the rest over there," she said, pointing at the wood box, "and mind ye not be a scatterbark, missy." "What, and dirty all this neat?" Susan thought. She bit the insides of her cheeks to kill the smile that wanted to rise on her mouth. Rhea might have sensed it, however. When Susan straightened again, the old woman was looking at her with a dour, knowing expression. "All right, mistress, let's do our business and have it done. Do ye know why you're here?" "I am here at Mayor Thorne's wish," Susan repeated, knowing that was no real answer. She was frightened now, more frightened than when she looked through the window and seen the old woman crooning to the glass ball. "His wife has come barren to the end of her courses. He wishes to have a son before he is also unable to—" "Pish tush, spare me the codswallop and pretty words. He wants tits and arse that don't squish in his hands and a box that'll grip what he pushes. If he's still man enough to push it, that is. If a son come of it, aye, fine. He'll give it over to ye and keep and raise until it's old enough to school, and after that you'll see it no more. If it's a daughter, he'll likely take it from ye and give it to his new man, the one with the girl's hair and the limp to drown in the nearest cattle wallow. Susan stared at her, shocked out of all measure. The old woman saw the look and laughed. Don't like the sound of the truth, do yer? Few do, missy. But that's neither here nor there. Your auntie was ever Trig once, and she'll have done all right out of Thorin and Thorin's treasury. What gold you see is none of mine, and won't be none of yours either if you don't watch sharp. Take off your dress. I won't, was what rose to her lips, but what then? To be turned out of this hut, and to be turned out pretty much as she had come, and not as a lizard or hopping toad, would probably be the best luck she could hope for. And sent west as she was now, without even 2 gold coins, and without even the 2 gold coins she brought up here, and that was only the small half of it. The large was that she had given her word. At first she had resisted, but when Aunt Cord had invoked her father's name, she had given in, as she always did. Really, she had no choice, and when there was no choice, hesitation was ever a fault. She brushed the front of her apron, to which small bits of bark now clung, then untied it and took it off. She folded it and laid it on a small grimy hassock near the hearth and unbuttoned her dress to the waist. She shivered it from her shoulders and stepped out. She folded it and laid it atop the apron, trying not to mind the greedy way Rhea of Coos stared at her in the firelight. The cat came, sashaying across the floor, grotesque extra legs bobbling, and sat at Rhea's feet. Outside the wind gusted. It was warm on the hearth, but Susan was cold just the same, as if that wind had gotten inside of her somehow. Hurry, girl, for your father's sake. Susan pulled her shift over her head, folded it atop the dress, then stood in only her drawers with her arms folded over her bosoms. The fire painted warm orange highlights along her thighs, black circles of shadow in the tender folds behind her knees. And still she's not naked, the old crow laughed. Ain't we, laddie? Aye, we are very fine. Take off those drawers, mistress, and stand as ye slid from your mother, although ye had not so many goodies as to interest the likes of Hart Thorin then, did ye? Feeling caught in a nightmare, Susan did as she was bid. With her mound and bush uncovered, her crossed arms seemed foolish. She lowered them to her sides. Ah, no wonder he wants ye, the old woman said. 'Tis beautiful ye are, and true. Is she not, Musty? The cat rowed. There's dirt on your knees, Rhea said suddenly. How came it there? Susan felt a moment of awful panic. She had lifted her skirts to crawl beneath the hag's window, and hung herself by doing it. Then an answer rose to her lips, and she spake it calmly enough. When I came inside of your hut, I grew fearful, and I knelt to pray, and raised my skirts so as not to soil it. I'm touched, to want a clean dress for the likes of me. How good ye are! Don't you agree, Musty? The cat rowed, then began to lick one of his forepaws. Get on with it, Susan said. You've been paid, and I'll obey, but stop teasing me and have done. You know what it is I have to do, mistress. I don't, Susan said. The tears were close again, burning the backs of her eyes, but she would not let them fall. Would not. I have an idea, but when I asked Aunt Cord if I was right, she said that you'd take care of my education in that regard. Wouldn't dirty her mouth with the words, would she? Well, that's all right. Your Aunt Rhea's not too nice to say what your Aunt Cordelia won't. I'm to make sure you're physically and spiritually intact, missy. Proving honesty is what the old ones called it, and it's a good enough name, so it is. Step to me. Susan took 2 reluctant steps forward, so that her bare toes were almost touching the old woman's slippers, and her bare breasts were almost touching the old woman's dress. If a devil or demon had polluted your spirit, such a thing as might taint the child you'll likely bear, it leaves a mark behind. Most often, it's a suck mark or a lover's bite, but there's others. Open your mouth. Susan did, and when the old woman bent closer, the reek of her was so strong that the girl's stomach clenched. She held her breath, praying this would be over soon. Run out your tongue. Susan ran out her tongue. Now send your breezes into my face. Susan exhaled her held breath. Rhea breathed it in and then, mercifully, pulled her head away a little. She had been close enough for Susan to see the lice hopping in her hair. "Sweet enough," the old woman said. "Aye, good's a meal. Now turn around." Susan did, and felt the old witch's fingers trail down her back into her buttocks. Their tips were cold as mud. "Bend over and spread your cheeks, missy. Be not shy. Ray has seen more than one poultry in her time." Face flushing, she could feel the beat of her heart in the center of her forehead and in the hollows of her temples. Susan did as told. And then she felt one of those corpse-like fingers prod its way into her anus. Susan bit her lips to keep from screaming. The invasion was mercifully short, but there would be another, Susan feared. "Turn around." She turned. The old woman passed her hands over Susan's breasts, flicked lightly at the nipples with her thumbs, then examined the undersides carefully. Rhea slipped a finger into a cup of the girl's navel, then hitched up her own skirt and dropped to her knees with a grunt of an effort. She passed her hands down Susan's legs, first front, then back, seemed to take special pains with the area just below the calves where the tendons ran. "Lift your right foot, girl." Susan did, and uttered a nervous, screamy laugh as Rhea ran a thumbnail down her instep to her heel. The old woman parted her toes, looking between each pair. After the process had been repeated with the other foot, the old woman, still on her knees, said, "You know what comes next?" "Aye." The word came out of her in a little trembling rush. "Hold ye still, missy. All else is well, clean as a willow strip ye are, but now we've come to the cozy nook that's all Thorn cares for. We've come to where honesty must really be proved, so hold ye still." Susan closed her eyes and thought of horses running along the drop. Nominally, they were the barony's horse, overlooked by the Rhymer, Thorn's chancellor and the barony minister of inventory, but the horses didn't know that. They thought they were free, and if you were free in your mind, what else mattered? "Let me be free in my mind, as free as the horses along the drop, and don't let her hurt me. Please don't let her hurt me. If she does, please help me bear it in decent silence." Cold fingers parted the downy hair below her navel. There was a pause, and then 2 cold fingers slipped inside her. There was pain, but only a moment of it, and not bad. She'd hurt herself worse, stubbing her toe or barking her shin on the way to the privy in the middle of the night. The humiliation was the bad part, the revulsion of Rhea's ancient touch. "Cocked tight ye are," Rhea cried. "Good as ever was. But Thorn'll see to that, so he will. As for you, my girl, I'll tell you a secret your prissy aunt won't with her long nose and tight purse and little goose-bumped tits never knew. Even a girl who's intact don't need to lack a shiver now and then, if she knows how." The old hag's withdrawing fingers closed gently around the little nubbin of flesh at the head of Susan's cleft. For one terrible second, Susan thought they would pinch that sensitive place, which sometimes made her draw in a breath if it rubbed just so against the pommel of her saddle when she was riding. But instead the fingers caressed, then pressed, and the girl was horrified to feel the heat, which was far from unpleasant, kindle in her belly. "Like a little bud of silk," the old woman crooned, and her meddling fingers moved faster. Susan felt her hips sway forward, as if with a mind and life of their own, and then she thought of the old woman's greedy, self-willed face, pink with the face of the whore by the gaslight as it hung over the open box. She thought of the way the drawstring bag with the gold pieces in it had hung from the wrinkled mouth like some disgorged piece of flesh, and the heat she felt was gone. She drew back, trembling, her arms and belly and breasts breaking out in goose-flesh. "You finished what you were paid to do," Susan said. Her voice was dry and harsh. Rhea's voice nodded. "You'll tell me I no, yes, or maybe, impudent stripling of a girl. I know when I'm done. I, Rhea, the weirding of cows, and be still and be on your feet before I kick you into the fire, unnatural thing." The old woman's lips wriggled back from her few remaining teeth in a dog-like sneer, and now, Susan realized, she and the witch woman were back where they had been at the start, ready to claw each other's eyes out. "Raise hand or foot to me, you impudent cunt, and what leaves my house will leave handless, footless, and blind of eye." "I do not much doubt you could do it, but Thorn should be vexed," Susan said. It was the first time in her life she had ever invoked a man's name for protection. Realizing this made her feel ashamed. Small, somehow. She didn't know why that should be, especially since she had agreed to sleep in his bed and bear his child, but it was. The old woman stared, her seamed face working until it folded into a parody of a smile that was worse than her snarl, puffing and pulling at the arm of her chair. Rhea got to her feet. As she did, Susan quickly began to dress. "I, vexed he would be. Perhaps you know best after all, missy. I've had a strange night, and it's wakened parts of me better left asleep. Anything else that might have happened, take it as a compliment to your youth and purity, and to your beauty as well. You're a beautiful thing, and there's no doubt in it. Your hair, now, when you let it down, as you will for Thorin, I wot, when you lay with him, it glows like the sun, doesn't it?" Susan did not want to force the old hag out of her posturing, but she didn't want to encourage these fawning compliments either. Not when she could still see the hate in Rhea's roomie's eyes, not when she could feel the old woman's touch still crawling like beetles on her skin. She said nothing, only stepped into her dress, set it on her shoulders, and began to button up the front. Rhea perhaps understood the run of her thoughts, for the smile dropped off her mouth and her manner grew businesslike. Susan found this a great relief. "Well, never mind it. Ye've proved honest. Ye may dress yourself and go. But not a word of what passed between us to Thorin, mind ye. Words between women need trouble no man's ear, especially one as great as he." Yet at this Rhea could not forbear a certain spasming sneer. Susan didn't know if the old woman was aware of it or not. "Are we agreed?" Anything, just as long as I can be out of here and away. You declare me proved?" "Aye, Susan, daughter of Patrick, so I do. But it's not what I say that matters. Now, wait. Somewhere here." She scrambled along the mantel, pushing stubs of candles struck on cracked saucers this way and that, lifting first a kerosene lantern, then a battery flashlight, looking fixedly for a moment at a drawing of a young boy, and then putting it aside. Where, here." She snatched up a pad of paper with a sooty cover. Citgo stamped on it in ancient gold letters, and a stub of a pencil. She paged almost to the end of the pad before finding a blank sheet. On it she scrawled something that tore the sheet off the spiral of wire on the top of the pad. She held the sheet out to Susan, who took it and looked at it. Scrawled there was a word she did not understand at first, and below it was a symbol. The reason she doesn't understand it is the word is honest, but honest is spelled O-N-N-E-S-T. And the symbol, looks like a backward C, and then in the middle is a line coming out of it off to the right. If you turn it sideways, it looks kind of like a devil's trident. And the trident end would be on the left. Okay. "What's this?" she asked, tapping the little drawing. "Rhea, her mark. Known for 6 baronies around, it is, and can't be copied. Show that paper to your aunt, then to Thorin. If your aunt wants to take it and show it to Thorin herself, I know her, you see, and her bossy ways. Tell her no. Rhea says no, and she's not to have the keeping of it. And if Thorin wants it?" Rhea shrugged dismissively. "Let him keep it or burn it or wipe his bum with it, for all of me. It's nothing to you, either, for you knew you were honest all along, so you did. True?" Susan nodded. Once, walking home after a dance, she had let a boy slip his hand inside her shirt for a moment or two, but what of that? She was honest, and in more ways than this nasty creature meant. "But don't lose that paper, unless you'd see me again, that is, and go through the same business a second time." Gods perish even the thought, Susan thought, and managed not to shudder. She put the paper in her pocket, where the drawstring bag had been. "Now come to the door, missy." She looked as if she wanted to grasp Susan's arms, then thought better of it. The two of them walked side by side to the door, not touching in such a careful way that it made them look awkward. Once there, Rhea did grip Susan's arm. Then with her other hand she pointed to the bright silver disk hanging over the top of the coast. "The kissing moon," Rhea said. "'Tis midsummer." "Yes." "Tell Thorin he's not to have you in his bed, or in a haystack, or on the scully floor, or anywhere else, until Demon Moon rises full in the sky." "Not until reaping?" That was 3 months. A lifetime, it seemed to her. Susan tried not to show her delight at this reprieve. She thought Thorin would put an end to her virginity by moonrise the next night. She wasn't blind to the way he looked at her. Rhea, meanwhile, was looking at the moon, seeming to calculate. Her hand went to the long tail of Susan's hair and stroked it. Susan bore this as well as she could, and just when she felt she could bear it no longer, Rhea dropped her hand back to her side and nodded. "Aye, not just reaping, but true fin de año, fair night. Tell him. Say that he may have you after the bonfire, you understand?" True fin de año, yes. She could barely contain her joy. "When the fire in the green heart burns low and the last of the red-handed men are ashes," Rhea said, "then, and not until then, you must tell him so." "I will." The hand came out and began to stroke her hair again. Susan bore it. After such good news, she thought, it would have been mean-spirited to do otherwise. "The time between now and reaping you will use to mediate and to gather your forces to produce the male child the mayor wants. Or mayhap just to ride along the drop and gather the last flowers of your maidenhood. Do you understand?" "Yes." She dropped a curtsy. "Thank ye, Sai." Rhea waved this off as if it were flattery. "Speak not of what passes between us, mind. 'Tis no one's affair but our own." "I won't, and our business is done." "Well, mayhap there's one more small thing." Rhea smiled to show it was indeed small, then raised her left hand in front of Susan's eyes with 3 fingers together and 1 apart. Glimmering in the fork between was the silver medallion, seemingly produced from nowhere. The girl's eyes fastened on it at once, until Rhea spoke a single guttural word. That was. Then they closed. Rhea looked at the girl who stood asleep on her stoop in the moonlight. As she replaced the medallion within her sleeve, her fingers were old and bunchy, but they moved dexterously enough when it was required. Oh, aye. The businesslike expression fell from her face and was replaced by a look of squint-eyed fury. "Kick me into the fire, would you troll?" tattled Thorin. But her threats and impudence weren't the worst. The worst had been the expression of revulsion on her face when she had pulled back from Rhea's touch. Too good for Rhea she was, and thought herself too good for Thorin as well, no doubt. She, with 16 years' worth of fine blonde hair hanging down from her head, hair Thorin, no doubt, dreamed of plunging his hands into, even as he plunged and reared and plowed down below. She couldn't hurt the girl, much as she wanted to, and much as the girl deserved it, if nothing else. Thorin might take the glass ball away from her, and Rhea couldn't bear that, not yet anyway. So she could not hurt the girl, but she could do something that would spoil his pleasure in her, at least for a while. Rhea leaned close to the girl, grasped the long braid which lay down her back, and began to slip it through her fist, enjoying its silky smoothness. "Susan," she whispered. "Do you hear me, Susan, daughter of Patrick?" "Yes." The eyes did not open. "Then listen." The light of the kissing moon fell on Rhea's face and turned it into a silver skull. "Listen to me well and remember. Remember in the deep cave where your waking mind never goes." She pulled the braid through her hand again and again, silky and smooth, like the little bud between her legs. "Remember," the girl in the doorway said. "Aye. There's something you'll do after he takes your virginity. You'll do it right away without even thinking about it. Now listen to me, Susan, daughter of Patrick, and hear me very well." Still stroking the girl's hair, Rhea put her wrinkled lips to the smooth cup of Susan's ear and whispered in the moonlight. And that is a good stopping place for today, and we will continue with Chapter 3, A Meeting on the Road, next week. Thank you for coming, pretty shiny peoples.